The next person we're going to welcome to Black Journal this evening is no stranger to anyone in America. As a matter of fact, the 1960s civil rights struggle, I think, has been redefined. There's a new kind of struggle now. And I think a man that has his fingers on the pulse of the public, who has his fingers on the political times, who is moving in ways that are economically, politically, culturally advantageous. And I can say, you know, a person that I know, anytime I have asked to do anything, has done it. And he is a good-looking man. I envy him in that respect. He's young, he's dynamic.
You don't have anything to worry about, my darling.
That's why I asked you on. You are really beautiful. I mean, I really need it. I was looking for that, and that was really nice. I'd like now to introduce my favorite country preacher. Ladies and gentlemen, the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Never did this for a country preacher out in South Carolina. Music and all.
That's right.
What are you doing these days?
Well, just glad to be up here in New York with y'all.
No.
Well,
I know the old country boy routine.
We're really putting an awful lot of emphasis into dealing with the effects of this economy upon all poor people, our people in particular. I think our movement now has to have a dual focus: economic generation and spiritual regeneration. Economic generation to the extent that we have more than 6 million people unemployed, 25 million people making less than $3,000 a year, another 25 million less than $6,000, another 25 million less than $9,000. And given the inflated economy, that means that you have 3 levels of real poverty in the country. So that is a critical question. On the other hand, we have a kind of deteriorating spiritual condition in the black community, where our young people are trapped pushing dope in their veins rather than hope in their brains, and pickling their brains with liquor and using all kinds of ways to escape reality. It is at that level that we must be spiritually regenerated, because if we have a new school and don't have the will to learn, it's of no avail. Or if we got a job and don't have the will to work, or we have the opportunity and can't seize it because we've tripped out. So it is at that level we must have a dual focus. I guess biblically speaking, you would say that man cannot live by bread alone. You need the bread and the spiritual development. The question becomes, how do you break such a recession as this? Number one, you point to the weaknesses of it. The inflation that we're now on is not a consumer-inspired inflation where people have spent too much, but rather because the super rich and the military budget have been made into sacred cows. Ford says he's going to save $5 billion in surtax. Well, the fact is the military budget's growth is $7 billion a year. Why is that $7 billion sacred? You ask people making $15,000 a year to tighten up their belts. Well, they're already wearing suspenders because their real income has been eaten up by inflation. Then he says that if we save $20 billion from federal spending, we can break stagflation. Well, the Proxima report indicates that the military spent beyond its appropriations last year $27 billion. Now, that plus the super rich not being taxed properly and being allowed to develop monopolies and run competition out of business, that is why the economy is jammed. So, on the one hand, we must know that. On the other hand, we must prepare to hit these streets marching again en masse. January 15th this year, which is Dr. King's birth date, we're going to celebrate it by marching in at least 50 cities simultaneously. Marching, I might add, behind the Hawkins Full Employment Bill, demanding that once and for all that is declared in this country that everybody has a right to a job, a decent house, and medical care. In my judgment, that's where the struggle is now. It's not as much civil rights as it is silver rights. It's a matter of redefining the economy.
You know, I heard him, Diane, in Chicago at his annual Black Expo. And you made a very interesting parallel, as you do often, your 3 E's.
Well, my point is that we must be ethnic, which is our blackness, accept our African roots, our African heritage, get all of the psychological self-esteem that we need out of being black. Have our natural hairdos and our symbols of blackness, but you got to go beyond being ethnic. You must also be ethical. Cain and Abel were ethnic. They were two brothers, came out the same mother's womb, but they were not ethical, and so they killed each other. So in addition to being ethnic, you must be ethical, but beyond that, you must be excellent. Because in the last analysis, the only thing that will protect you from genocide is to be necessary. I mean, whether you're in America or in Africa and wherever, your life chances are increased by being excellent. Now, you may not survive even if you're not excellent, but you're almost guaranteed to get wiped out if you're not excellent. I mean, that which has protected a Hank Aaron, that which protected a Willie Mays, that which has sustained a Muhammad Ali, that which has made a Ralph Bunche go down into the annals of science, or George Washington Carver, is in spite of a racist society not liking their ethnicity, their excellence was of such until even their enemies had to respect where they were coming from.
What do you think of Rockefeller as vice president?
Well, I think it's a bad choice for the country. Basically, I think it's bad because at one level, there's a very delicate balance of power in this country between labor, business, and government. And when a man with that much concentrated economic wealth is one heartbeat away from the presidency, it destroys that balance of power. Beyond the way he handled an Attica situation, which, you know, becomes murder in my judgment. It's bad that that thing happened. But even if one were not coming out of our black emotional concern and ethical concern for Attica, it is not good for this government because there are some places where this government politically should not be, where he personally already is. So there's a collision course between the interests of the country and the interests of the Rockefeller family. I think that it's a bad situation. I would hasten to add, however, that if Rockefeller and Ford have their team, and if Nixon is resurrected, it is not racism will stop us as much as cynicism will. We can overcome Rockefeller and Bilbo and Maddox and all of that bunch if we just don't give up. And that is what kind of frightens me about this kind of cynical reasoning about blacks can't make it. So I contend that the system is not good, but we can make it in it if anybody can, because we can do what other folk can do. Now, if we have integrity, not only will we make it, we will change it also. But I cannot accept a set of reasons why we can't finish school, or a set of reasons why our track men can't win the race, or why our boxers can't win the boxing match. We can accept no reason. We have fought racism because we never allowed cynicism to overtake us. I think when one looks at the struggles you've had with this show, I mean, racism has tried to jam you, but if you had moved and become cynical, then even if racism had moved, you still couldn't have conducted your show.
I had a little slogan once. I asked some of my students, if racism quit, could you take advantage of it?
Oh, that's the fundamental proposition. I mean, that's the case of Muhammad Ali. Racism took his title, but they didn't take his manhood.
Right.
And so when racism stepped out the way, he didn't step back in the ring 300 pounds and slow, you know, because he kept his head together, you know. So at that level, you know, since preachers always develop sayings.
Speaking of preachers, let me ask you a preacher question.
Don't you forget that.
And I won't. And you called me a frustrated preacher. Let me ask you, Flip Wilson brings a whole phenomenon into focus, and that is the responsibility of the black artist to black people, et cetera, and so forth. Now, we know black artists have to eat, et cetera, and so forth. And it's the old runaround about how much of this can I do and how much of this. He's been doing the Reverend Leroy. And
the question is, who are you going to eat?
Well,
you know,
in the opinion, let me ask you the...
are you going to eat?
Right.
Are you going to eat animals, or are we going to eat each other?
Right.
And I think that when we make the kind of move that he has made relative to the black church, that he has moved into the area of the sacred. And Jewish comedians crack a lot of funny jokes, but it's never about the rabbi. The Catholic comedians crack a lot of jokes, but it's never about the Pope. In other words, there is something sacred. I think there's a lot of room to tell jokes and finger pop and make people laugh. I mean, I'm not one of the great critics of Amos and Andy because it was funny to me, and it didn't give me no brain damage either. But I think there's some areas that are basically sacred, and I think that a group of ministers, we're going to meet with that brother and try to arrive at some understanding, because on the one hand, we don't want to, we don't want to undercut him because...
It's not taking place in a dark alley, I hope.
Oh, no.
Friendly.
Well, we know how you Baptist preachers meet with people.
No, we're not going to meet. I tell you why, because on the one hand, I respect Flip because He has done a lot for our cause. He's done a lot of benefits, and he's tried hard. He put a lot of black folk on that show who otherwise never would have been on television.
But he says that his portrayal of Reverend Leroy does not in any way damage the image of black preachers.
Well, you see, we disagree, and that's why we have to have a meeting. You know, but not a meeting based in hostility, but when we have differences, we must reconcile our differences through dialogue and like civilized people. In the final analysis, it will not hurt us because that which he's portraying is not the truth. It won't hurt preachers, but it may hurt our children who don't know any better. Somebody needs to know the first piece of property bought in America by blacks was bought by the black church. That the first black bank, first black insurance company, first black college, Wilberforce University, black church. We talk about Harriet Tubman and Underground Railroad. The black church was the railway station. We talk about Denmark Vesey being hung in South Carolina. The AME church also was put out of South Carolina because that was his headquarters. We talk about the civil rights legislation that was led by Adam Powell and Dr. King. These were black preachers. And so if our black children get trapped thinking that the black preacher is Reverend Leroy and thinking the black pimp is some kind of hero, it reverses their psyche. So what he's doing, it may appear to be funny, but it's more dangerous than it is funny. So we need to discuss this. I'm not even sure he understands this history, all the ramifications of his actions. So I would not suggest that we need to get nasty and hostile and try to jam him relative to NBC, but to appeal to him to reason. Right. Just like I may do something that's out of line. I mean, I'm on TV and rapping and talking in this stuff. I would hope that you would have the capacity to come to me as a rational, concerned brother or sister without having to become anti-me.
Sure.
Yes, I think. But there is another point that I think is absolutely valid, and I'm not sure how I feel about this. I only know that it's important for us to be able to find the areas of ourselves where we can laugh. I think humor has saved us many, many times. Now, the fact that you are discussing all of the pluses and all of the marvelous men that you just discussed that I was not aware of until you just made me aware of them as ministers is another point. You see, Flip, to me, has made another point. And you're not going to tell me I have never seen Reverend Leroy, because I have. I was raised partially with a Reverend Leroy. And he was not...
What kind of church did you go to?
A Reverend Leroy church.
Well, but you see,
but I'm not saying, Reverend, the
typical.
only thing I'm saying is that there are two sides to that coin. And I believe Flip is representing one side of it. Now, is it his responsibility to represent both sides of it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I happen to think that that is a rather sacred area, that is off limits, that we know that the typical relationship between black worshiper and black church is not one of unserious stupidity. It is like taking the pimp on the face and magnifying it and calling the pimp the face and calling the face the pimple. We have no reason to disregard, however raggedy it is, if it kept our folks' souls together, if it kept our women from jumping out of doors, and if it became the place where literally our spiritual witch doctors kept our minds together, then it's hallowed ground for us. I contend that it's not your aptitude, but your attitude that determines your altitude, how high you're going to get. And we must have a certain attitude about something sacred. Without having something sacred, then if we disrespect the black church, we disrespect the school, we disrespect each other, we disrespect ourselves, where does respect emanate from? Where's the getting off point for respect?
I see exactly what you're saying. It's just that I am not positive that we're talking about a man who disrespects religion. I think he has found an area that was humorous, and you are taking exception with his presenting that area. But
I'm trying to be awfully kind about it. You know, I like him personally. I relate to Flip very well, and the reason why I said I would always support him is because he has been so generous to this cause, and at that level, I'm not cutting into his person.
But then again, you are building up my
point,
point, and that is that the man is able to see both sides of the thing. I mean, if he can do that for your cause, he most certainly sees the good of it and knows the good of it and is willing to make his life part of that. But he also sees the other side of it, which does have some humor in it.
But the effect of that which he is doing goes beyond where his contributions come in. My only contention is that there is a disagreement over that area, and that we're going to have a brother to talk and try to arrive at an area. I would not like to see every time he comes on television, black preachers and black churches feeling the urge to try to boycott or picket his show. I don't think that we need to get into that. I think that civilized people, short of warfare, can develop some living peace or détente.
Well, we also need more shows on the air so that we don't have just Mr. Wilson to, if there
I
were
hate to
more
interrupt.
blacks on television.
I
I'm
hate to
sorry.
interrupt. We're at the end of the program, and there's never enough time for the country preacher. And I'd like to thank you very much, Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Thank you for letting me come up
and being our guest. I'd like to extend a very warm and appreciative thank you to my co-hostess
It was
for
my
this program,
pleasure.
Diane Carroll, and later on, Diane, if you want. All right, we're going to have to close this show. We're having a big party tonight, and Diane says she can do the double bump. I want to see it.
I'm
We
gonna
thank you very
behave
much for
tonight.
being our guest, and I'd like to thank our very responsive and warm audience. Come again, and good night for Black Journal this evening.